Welcome to the Empowered Curiosity podcast. I am just coming off of a cold, so if my voice feels a little bit deeper, maybe slightly sexier than usual, don't get too attached. I'm going to do my best to get through this intro without coughing. The first thing I want to share with you is that this episode was inspired by Gabor Mate, and I stumbled upon a quote of his while scrolling through Instagram, and I'm going to just share that quote with you. Safety is not the absence of threat, it is the presence of connection. And when I read that, it was a stop me in the tracks, electricity up the spine sort of a moment. And to me, it always goes back to this work that we do, to my community of spiritual entrepreneurs. And I think that this is the fundamental cord that runs through this work that we are all doing as spiritual entrepreneurs. Now, I am feeling these tectonic shifts, and if you're here, then you are probably feeling them as well. And that tectonic shift is us shifting away from running our businesses through disconnection. We are collectively emerging out of this era, and we are moving towards connection in our businesses. So, disconnection, it fosters competition, linear growth, hierarchy between practitioner and client, burnout, and perfectionistic messaging. And as we move towards connection, it's this brand new frontier that we don't really understand, but we have to remember that we are all going to encounter things within our businesses as entrepreneurs that feel threatening and risky. And what do we do in the face of that threat and that feeling of risk is going to ripple through in how we support our clients. So running a business pushes up against universal wounds. Things like our relationship to resources, validation, and capacity are the first things that come to mind for me. So your ability to pay your rent, your mortgage, or your employees falls on your shoulders. You might find yourself craving likes and comments on your Instagram posts because it feels really validating to your self-worth. You might be confronted with navigating the sticky spaces of having too little clients, or maybe the stickiness comes up because you have too many clients. All these challenges that you feel as an entrepreneur are completely valid. However, as spiritual entrepreneurs, what we need to do is we need to start seeing these challenges as invitations to deepen our work. So the pattern breaking work that we are all here to do together in this community is to seek connection rather than disconnection in the face of what feels threatening. Falling into your old patterns of disconnection can look like maybe comparing yourself to other people in your field, telling yourself something needs to be absolutely perfect before it can be shared with your community, forcing yourself to work beyond what you feel comfortable, what your body feels comfortable doing, creating shame around having a bad month, tying your self-worth to how well your social media posts are doing. I mean, this list can go on and on and on. So having your business as a portal to connection, both to yourself and to others, is really about untangling the trauma that lies within your body so that you have access to your inherent wisdom and regulation. And this is how we find true safety within our businesses. And we are going to need to learn to lean on trust because running a business is sometimes going to feel like trust falling with the universe. So this week, I have asked two current members of Business Alchemist Mentorship to come and explore this concept of finding safety through connection. And so what you're going to learn in this episode is how safety and connection are the foundations of a long-term relationship with clients and the sustainability of your business. How spiritual entrepreneurship can feel dysregulating because it's based on principles that are the opposite of how most of us were conditioned to believe and feel and do. How the path of spiritual entrepreneurship can feel isolating, and seeking healthy mentorship and community is key to staying regulated. How the best way to foster safety within our clients is for our own systems to be regulated and resourced, and how slowing down and making decisions with intention as you develop your business is actually faster than making decisions quickly that lead you away from alignment. My first guest is Christopher Miller, who you've heard on this podcast before. He was on episode 59, and we talked about mindful communication in that one. And then he was also on episode 20, where we dove into our mutual love of the 5 elements system. And you are going to hear a lot more of him this year because we are going to be hosting Taoist Lunar Wisdom Talks on Instagram Live for every full moon, and that's also going to be released as podcast episodes, so you'll hear him a lot on this podcast. Chris is an I Ching reader, he's an emotional alchemist, he's an acupuncturist, and a body worker who addresses the root cause of stagnation and discontent. He believes that the act of being sincerely acknowledged sparks profound medicine and allows for aligned choice. Through his years and experience of being an acupuncturist, body worker, and mentor, Christopher has developed a practice of deep listening and the capacity to hold space for transformation. You can find him virtually or in his office at the Portland Wellness Collective, and he desires to meet you where you are and walk alongside you on a path towards clarity and freedom. Our second guest is Sarah Cook, and it is her first time on the show, but honestly, after her multiple mic drop moments that you are going to hear in this episode, it is definitely not going to be her last. So Sarah is a writing and creativity coach. She helps people tend to their creativity in order to meet their artistic goals, develop their craft and creative intuition, and experience more energy and enthusiasm for their work. So she's a poet and an essayist. Her own creative work has appeared in places like the Oregon Humanities Magazine, Porterhouse Review, So to Speak, The Art of Everyone, and in her Substack newsletter, For the Birds. Her newest chapbook, Birds, Index Without Order, was published earlier this year by Bottle Cap Press. Now, Sarah is about to launch a new podcast with her friend and fellow coach Cecily Saylor, who actually you're going to hear on next week's episode, and that podcast is called Full-Time Weirdos. They will talk about thriving as you trust your truest, your weirdest self in a world that insists on conformity. Sarah and Cecily dive deep with fellow weirdos, artists, and each other about the scary choices and unexpected paths leading them to their most creative and joyful selves. So I'll put all the links to both Chris and Sarah and how you can connect with them in the show notes below. And I hope that you enjoy this episode. I had such a blast, and honestly, I've had my mind blown multiple times in this conversation with the two of them. So enjoy. Hello, and welcome to the Empowered Curiosity podcast. Today, I've got two dear friends, colleagues of mine, Christopher Mailer, who has been on this podcast several times before. We've done lots of talks about 5 elements and Taoist philosophy, and we've got a new voice on the podcast, Sarah Cook, and both Chris and Sarah are part of the current cohort of Business Alchemist Mentorship, and we're about a third of the way through, and I thought it'd be really great to have you both on to talk about this giant concept of safety. So I'll give folks a bit of a background into why I wanted to talk about this with the two of you is because I was just scrolling through Instagram and saw this quote by Gabor Mate, amazing writer. Please go check out his books. He's got a new one out with his son, but the quote was, "Safety is not the absence of threat. It is the presence of connection." And that completely just went in my brain, and I've been mushing it around in my brain ever since. And because I am a processor who likes to process with other humans, I wanted to ask Chris and Sarah to come on, and we're just gonna process and mush this around together. So welcome to the show, Chris. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Hi, Kat. Hi, Chris.
Thank you. Hi.
So I think what would be I don't always take a linear path, and so I'm sort of hesitating to take a linear path here, but I feel like the place to land and ground this first is to talk about spiritual entrepreneurship and why spiritual entrepreneurship can feel so goddamn threatening sometimes, and what can come up for folks. Yeah, what can come up for folks along that journey, and then we'll sort of tie in these pieces around safety. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of me being in BAM is also figuring out, yeah, what do I even mean by spiritual entrepreneurship, and what am I taking on by being called to and choosing that identity? I think the first place my mind goes is just to like the common story of competition in any kind of like entrepreneurship and any kind of business space, and this idea that like I'm opting for something different than that. And like being willing to see the business that I'm building and the work that I'm doing as something that is like more grounded in collaboration than competition. And I think that's where this initial thought ends.
Yeah, that's great. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, for me, the whole concept of owning my own business, and especially since I've brought a child into this world. Well, my wife did that. I helped, but this whole idea of like grinding and hustling and pushing and externalizing the need to put food on the table at the cost of how much resource I have to do that is something that I've kind of been on a journey with since the pandemic started in 2019, 2020. And this curriculum that we're going through with BAM, I have to say BAM like that. I can't not say it like that. Has really upped my internal listening gauge, and has kind of pointed out to me how unsafe business has been for me as an entrepreneur, and especially in the wellness field. And we could talk about all of the traps of the wellness field and what have you, but the guise of being regulated and safe and also selling and getting money from people and what have you is a particular risky endeavor. And going back to your quote, it feels like it is not connection. In fact, it is extractive. It is isolating. Yeah.
Can I ask you to unpack why you say particularly in the wellness space? I think that there's some sticky bits there that I think our listeners will be able to identify with, or also just say, I understand that.
Yeah, sticky bits. I feel, well, I said particularly with the wellness space because that's the space I find myself in. So I can't really speak about any other space, but in my own kind of investigation and readings, I've found the wellness space to be particularly problematic, in that there's a whole bunch of power dynamic issues that can come up. And Kat, I think that's maybe 3 more podcasts to talk about that. But
Minimum.
in the guise at minimum, in the guise of safety and entrepreneurship, so I'm an acupuncturist by trade, and I do like one-on-one things. People come to me with a complaint, I hold space for them, and we move through it together. And just because of ethics and boundaries and what have you, there's already a power dynamic involved there. They give me money for my expertise. I give them advice that might help them feel better, so forth and so on. And if one in the wellness space is not like actively unpacking their own ego and their own power issues and the patriarchy and capitalism and racism and all that kind of stuff actively, while seeing clients, it can get really, well, it already is sticky, but it can
Mm-hmm.
get really sticky.
Yeah.
Um, and this whole concept of being an authority, which is kind of where the wellness space kind of pivots on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this quote is coming to mind that I heard recently. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. That's a quote by a Holocaust survivor, which I think is really poignant.
Mm-hmm.
Eli Wiesel, I think it is. Um, and and so this power dynamic, this authority, this like I have something that you want, what have you, creates this indifference, this separation, this like, I don't know if it's I'm better than you or what have you, certainly does not breed connection.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the quote, the safety is in connection.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then that like stirs in the person who is the wellness professional the need to maintain this never-ending search to be better than, superior, what have you.
Yeah.
It's rough. It's, as I'll use your word, sticky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think what that brings to mind is, regardless of whether you're in the wellness space or, you're in a different kind of field as an entrepreneur, these pieces, these sticky threads around extraction and capitalism and patriarchy and all the isms and whys and all that, weaves its way through so many of our fields without knowing. And for us to unpack each of these pieces, it requires us each as individuals to go back into wounded places from our childhood. It requires us to go back and understand, hey, why do I have that piece around perfectionism? Is that possibly because I was expected to appear perfect when I was a child? Why do I have this piece around making sure that I am at the top of the competition? Is that somehow ingrained in me from childhood? And when we are able to understand and integrate those old stories within us, I think that that's how we help shift the collective towards, as you were saying earlier, Sarah, a more collaborative culture, a more commerce-based culture, where both the practitioner and the client are in a reciprocal relationship with each other, instead of it being this extractive relationship where the practitioner is getting more out of the relationship, or in a martyred relationship where the client is getting more out of the relationship. We want it to be this balance where both parties are getting fed. And that's kind of my like big dream of why I want to talk about these things, is because I think, yes, we bring people in through BAM through this portal of entrepreneurship, but ultimately, like, it expands and ripples out into so many different aspects, including parenthood, including our personal work, including how we relate to our partners, how we relate to our friends, how we treat other business owners as clients. It's all interconnected for me.
Yeah, and all of this links back to this idea of success too, and especially like the model of success that I feel like I inherited, and this constant need as someone who wants to like go about businessing differently, this constant need to like redefine what I mean when I say that I want to be successful or that I'm striving for success. And like, I want to be really clear, I didn't go to business school. Like, my understanding of entrepreneurship is mostly through like growing up in a capitalist society and like the weird cultural osmosis, and also watching like lots and lots and lots of Shark Tank, by the way. But that being said, like Chris, all the language that you were using, like earlier when you were naming like hustle and the grind and all those things, like I feel like, oh yeah, the the methods that we are given, like pretty blatantly for how to achieve success are like inherently unsafe
Yeah.
and like don't promote our wellness and don't promote collaboration, they promote competition. So all of this stuff feels like so deeply knotted.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that this is why that quote just rings so, like, it hit something deep in my soul.
Mm-hmm.
Because entrepreneurship, the way that it is done now, is, as you say, like, inherently threatening. Like, there's an
Mm-hmm.
inherent threat around, if I'm going to start a business, then there's this perceived idea of it has to look like this idea of success, this,
Mm-hmm.
financial goal. It has to look like I am the authority on X, Y, and Z subjects. And so, in the presence of something that we can all acknowledge within our own bodies and within our own, unique experiences, entrepreneurship feels really threatening. I think the question here is, how can we find that connection, that through line, so that it no longer feels like a threatening space for ourselves, which then means that we are able to show up as safe havens for our clients. Do you have any thoughts about how to unpack that? It's a big question.
Well, I know I'm kind of um, connecting to you used the word authority just now, and like this idea of authority being kind of invincible and infallible and like perfect and what have you, and that feels really isolating to me. Like there's part of me that just craves to be an authority. That's the big, big
Mm-hmm.
head ego part of me. But
Mm-hmm.
then if I like really lean into it, there's this like loneliness of, if someone comes to me for my quote authority, and I'm having a poor sleep day, or I'm hungry, or I'm also struggling with that same thing, or maybe I didn't have breakfast, or whatever, and I'm not at my best, then I have to like exert myself to be the authority without admitting that I'm not at my best. Because if I admit that I'm not at my best, then I won't be the authority anymore. And this is like that cat and mouse game that feels exhausting. Um, and yeah,
It's like we have to, like, yang our way through life. We have to, like, put on the, like,
I just heard you say yawn, YAWN, yawn our way through life.
and what I
I'm
said
like, I
was
am doing that right now.
YANG. We have to yang our way through life. I mean, and to me, what that means, it's like you have to put on these, like, artificial thrusters and create action in a way that's actually not grounded and intentional.
And you have to have this callousness
Mm-hmm.
about you as well, like not just like the thrusters and the highly caffeinated, like go go go, but like there is also this like callousness, or this protection, um, even to myself. Like I have to be callous to my own self. I caught myself last week in the middle of a client session, and my stomach rumbled because I had seen like four people in a row and what have you, um, and I apologized. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. And then we both laughed at it because this client knows that I'm unpacking all this and what have you, and we're kind of unpacking things together, and that feels really safe. But the apology of my stomach growling because I hadn't eaten and I was hungry, and I was also providing service to someone, is really interesting, because that was there's like a callousness to myself, a lack of compassion and indifference towards myself in order to make the buck, in order to provide the service.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's not
Yeah.
very safe.
It's all, well, and it's like dehumanizing, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, and I
God
think,
forbid humans are in business.
yeah, imagine that. And, I think that for me, what I have found both in my own personal experience and helping my clients through is actually this rehumanizing, remembering sort of work where we bring that connection first to yourself and we understand, some of those links that we talked about before. Like, is that perfectionism because you needed to perform when you were younger? All those pieces. But also being able to understand your own nervous system so that you're able to regulate yourself instead of looking for the business or your clients to regulate you. And so I think that this is why so much of the curriculum is so self-based in the beginning.
Mm.
And the reason why I did that is because we can't be offering regulation to other people, which a lot of us service providers are doing that, whether you're in the wellness space or you are a creative coach like Sarah is. Like, what you're offering is regulation, and I can help you regulate so that you can spark something really beautiful within yourself, whether that's a creative project or healing for yourself. And we can't offer that regulation without doing that work to regulate ourselves first. And so I think that that connection piece that Gabor Mate is talking about, if I can unpack that, there's first the connection to self that needs to happen. And then the second piece is connection to community, which I've had businesses since 2008, and the first decade plus of my entrepreneurial life was spent all by myself, you know, not really reaching out to other people for help, not really seeking support because of these things that you just talked about, Chris, of like, I need to look like an authority, not just to my clients, but to my colleagues, and have that like sort of armor as a protective space. And that is definitely not a safe space. That is, I'm creating my own threat in that situation, right?
I'm just having this moment. It's so funny how what you just described mirrors this like writerly myth of like, oh, to be a successful writer, it is isolating, it is necessarily like a solitary act. I'm find myself curious in this moment of like, oh, is there a version of this like isolating myth in any field? Like there must be.
Yeah.
I think there is. I know I can speak about the Portland, Oregon acupuncture community. When you leave school, I didn't have any business classes in acupuncture school. I guess that's not true. We had like an 8 hour
We had
like
one class.
weekend, yeah, weekend class or something that kind of said business is defined as something or
Yeah.
other, and it was not helpful at all. And they kick you out with these massive student loans, and they're like, okay, see you. Oh, and also if you want to come back to an alumni event and promote our school, go for it. So you're like scrambling in the community to get clients and experience, and you ultimately land in another community of acupuncturists who are a little bit more experienced and what have you. And they, take you under their wing, but it's kind of this like extractive process. I'm going to charge you rent or a percentage of your income so that you can work with me. And ultimately, it feels really isolating. And I don't know if it's because I didn't know enough or at the time didn't have the experience, but I just kind of went along with it. and yeah, it felt really isolating, and I couldn't really go to the person who I was being mentored by to ask for, advice or reassurance. So it was very isolating.
Yeah.
So yes, Sarah, I think that can translate, isolation can
Mm-hmm.
translate to all different
Mm-hmm.
fields.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, that brings up this concept of lineages. It's
Mm-hmm.
something
Mm,
that Sarah and I have talked about offline a bit, and I'd love to just continue to unpack that here because I think that a lot of times in that vulnerable space of, hey, I've learned a craft and I don't know what to do with this craft, or I want to expand my knowledge on this craft, we seek mentorship. We seek people who have been in the field for longer than us to help us understand. And I've been in lineages that have not felt safe, that have
Mm-hmm.
continued to create extraction, that have, whether it's in the business space or even just in like learning more about acupuncture. Back when I was an acupuncturist,
Mm-hmm.
there was a man that I studied with, and I was really into classical acupuncture for a little bit, wanting to understand the classical texts, going back to Taoist texts, understanding the medicine from that like really rooted tradition. And I studied with a man who was so rigid in his ways of thinking that it didn't allow me to expand as a practitioner. It was like he wanted me to just do the exact thing that he's doing. He wanted to create like carbon copies of himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that that's true mentorship. I don't think that that's true lineage. And then in the business space, the last acupuncture clinic that I worked for was incredibly extractive to their employees, to the point that I would, you know, argue that it was, what are the words that I want to use here? I guess extractive is the main word that comes up, is like we
Mm-hmm.
are putting on this face, we're putting on this idea that we are a team, that we're a family, and yet there is someone very clearly at the top
Mm-hmm.
who is riding on the labor and the efforts of the people below them. And I don't think that
Mm-hmm.
that is what a true team and a true family is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of curious about what you guys are feeling in terms of your experiences with lineages, and what sort of thoughts and questions come up for you there.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak a little bit more to what made me so excited to sort of ask you about this cat. And I think like there is this messaging that I've sort of encountered that coaching and life coaching in particular is this very new industry. It's very young, and I've seen coaches sort of point out a very, very specific, like singular lineage of coaches where
Mm-hmm.
this field has sort of been born out of. And I think when I have found myself sort of having weird feelings or struggling with understanding what what this lineage means to me is when it has felt like there's some kind of underlying power dynamics, to go back to a phrase that Chris had mentioned, or when it feels like being a part of that lineage somehow means that there's like an agenda placed on you. I think that's some of the language that comes to mind, and that has made, given me pause, and also makes me feel like, oh, is it an either or? Is it like you're either them or you're not? Like, I don't know. It starts to feel too a little bit black and white in my head, and I'm curious and like really like anxious for, or like desiring of some like other way of thinking
Yeah.
about it, you know?
Yeah. Is there also a bit of like an elevation of status if you graduate from this lineage or school?
I think so, yeah. I think to be able to sort of like, that's at least the impression I've had, that sometimes it's like, who you're associated with. And all of this comes back to like validation, right? It's sort of like, what counts? Does it count if you're a part of that lineage, or if you're not part of that lineage? Yeah, just validation feels like part of what's at stake here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, what feels like an alternate to that kind of thinking is embodiment. And what I mean by that is I am, admittedly a product of the like educational system that we all grow up in. Like I was a perfect student through school all the way up into grad school. And, looking back on that first part of my life, there was a lot of performance based. And there's a lot of, like, you just have to go through the hoops in order to get the pretty piece of paper, you know? And that's what I see out there with a lot of these life coaching programs. Is I thought about actually in my transition between acupuncture and mentorship, I thought about going back to school for therapy or life coaching or getting another pretty piece of paper. And what I found when I went and looked at all those programs and the curriculum is not a ton of embodiment. And so for me, I think the alternative is, what can you do as an ethical practitioner to fully embody the work that you want to do? And so for me, that choice was, I'm going to take classes and tons of workshops that don't give me a pretty piece of paper at the end of it that I can't put up on my website as I'm credentialed as X, Y, and Z. But I know that it's going to create a lot of embodiment for me, And so I don't know if that helps sort of clarify that question around lineage, but I think that a lot of folks seek the pretty piece of paper for validation, as you sort of named earlier. And instead of looking to those systems for validation, which in turn means we're looking for the greater extractive system for validation, what can you do within yourself to know on a moral and ethical level that you are validating your own work for yourself? I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does, and it's just kind of like a breath of fresh air to talk about it this way. And I feel like I wish it was a message that I ran into more often.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we all are service-based practitioners, and we all are put into a position where we want to help people, I think that we can carry this through in all of the fields of work that we do. For me, it's not about because I'm a business coach, I want you to do X, Y, and Z when it comes to your sales page. I want you to do X, Y, and Z when it comes to your marketing. For me, what's more important is, can you sit within your own integrity and do it in your own way? We can give you some frameworks to make the structure a little easier, but you're going to play with all the colors within that structure. And I think that applies to you as a creative coach, Sarah. I imagine that there's a lot of play that comes with it. And so there's a structure of hey, you're going to send me 15 pages every other week of writing. That's the structure. But your work then is more about a connection between you and your client in helping that inspiration and that creativity flow.
Yeah.
And then, And then for Chris too, it's there's a structure of that healing space and the advice that you can give, but it's ultimately about empowering that person to make those choices for themselves,
Yeah, I mean, I think that brings up the idea of feeling safe in a lineage.
Mm,
Um, so like there's a whole bunch of problematic experiences when you are pushed through um, a lineage without feeling your body and being given consent and all that kind of stuff. And um, at the very least, there's people who are reporting themselves as authorities and experts when they've only had like a brush with the lineage or like a weekend class or what have you, and
yes.
then they're making money off of important deep rooted lineages.
Hmm.
But then there's also inside the lineage the people at top who have the power and what have you, and are extracting and exploiting the people who are just beginning the lineage through lack of consent and what have you.
Mm.
One of the things that I really resonated and I think drew me to uh, BAM, drew me to your curriculum was that, and it's also kind of annoying, but it's perfect. Is that the first 12 years of your program is kind of getting still in yourself and calming your nervous
Was
system
that too
and what
slow for
have
you,
you.
Chris?
It is perfect at the perfect pace, and it is too slow for my like capitalistic need, right? And so, but that's exactly the pace that I needed to question those programs that were running in my head. And I kind of have already been doing this with my clients before the class, but I'm certain, or the curriculum, but I'm certainly doing it now, where we kind of the first few sessions are establishing their own metrics and their own like what does it feel to be like relaxed. And it's surprising how many people have no metric for that.
Yeah.
And so instead of me being like, oh, you have ankle pain, I know exactly how to fix that, or oh, your digestion's upset or what have you, um, take these herbs and these points and have this particular elimination diet or whatever. It's mostly like, how do you feel? How do you know that you're feeling that? What does that feel in your body? Like all that kind of stuff. And it's returning the authority back to the person who is seeking assistance or seeking my services. And it's that connection, right? So like I'm standing beside that person. Lineages kind of create this power structure. I've been through the lineage, so I know the details, but it's like, I'm going to actually stand beside you
Hmm.
and ask you some questions that I'm curious about
Mm.
and hold space for the questions that you're curious about. And now I think I'm going on a tangent, but I think you get what I'm saying.
No, and I think that this is like what I was dreaming of when it came to my, I'm gonna do like giant air quotes around my lineage of like how I want to teach is like I learned this stuff from reading Taoist texts and studying five element acupuncture. And I adapted that work into business. And from you taking a business course, you are now adapting that into your art form in your own way. And so I think that this is what true mentorship and lineage seeking is. It's about like having that medicine ripple out in its purest form into different areas, you know? And so then I start thinking about, okay, so then you're a client who's spent the first 3 or 4 sessions with you in a way that they've never spent with another healthcare practitioner and is being invited to slow down and check in with their bodies. How does that flow into their life? Maybe they're a manager of a company and they whether it's conscious or unconscious start putting some of that stuff into effect in their company. Or maybe they are a parent and they start asking their kids questions around, well, how does your body feel? You know? And this is where I feel like I I want to have like an indirect lineage to this
Mm.
work because there are people who studied this work, Taoism, five element acupuncture in particular way before I came around, and they inspired me to bring those aspects into business. And then from taking a business course, it inspires everybody who's in BAM to expand that and ripple that out in their own way without me needing to control or like put rigid boundaries around like what that has to look like for them. Because I think ultimately, like, people are pretty freaking smart. And, like, if you give them safety, if you help them feel connected, they come up with some brilliant answers all by themselves. You know?
Yeah, you mentioned parenting just then, and that's a topic that's up for me every single moment of the day right now. And I'm reading this book that I talk about every moment of the day. And so I'm sorry if I keep bringing it up to you, Kat, but the Good Inside by Dr. Becky
Oh my god, I
Kennedy.
love it.
I can't stop reading this book.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's so good.
it is so good. And the whole concept of this book is kind of the concept of BAM, which is like, we are in charge of regulating ourselves as parents so that our children can feel safe. That's it. Like, that's it. That's it. And if I can bring that concept of co-regulation or self-regulation into my business, and my patients, my clients can feel safe,
Yeah.
they're going to do their own thing. Like the amount of things that my son shows me, he's 14 months, is unbelievable because he feels safe to do it. And the concept of parenting, of like, I'm the authority, you do what I tell you to do, this is our family structure, this is my lineage of parenting, being paused in me because I'm checking in with myself to see if I've gotten enough rest, if I'm hungry, if I need to take a breath, if I'm lucky enough to pass my child over to my partner and take a walk by myself. That has changed, hopefully, some of the problematic lineages of my life is ending with me, just simply because I'm connecting, connecting to myself.
Yeah.
And therefore I'm able to connect to my son.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for bridging that, because I think that that's where a lot of the disconnection happens in business. It's like, let's even just think about marketing. You know, I'm going out there, and if I need to position myself as an authority and put myself higher than my people, and like, I need to, what are some of the things that business, like marketing folk,
Like, for a good example, Kat, sorry to interrupt.
no, go for it.
I've taken business classes before, or business courses before, and their whole like thing is, you have a full-time job. Yes, we understand that. And also, if you want to like kick off this side hustle or whatever, just work after your full-time job. And so me and my partner are both entrepreneurs, and we have a full-time job. And as an entrepreneur, it's not just like a 40-hour a week full-time job. It's like for real,
Yeah.
full-time. And like, when I started your class, or your curriculum, I was like, okay, I am ready to do the extra work necessary after I'm done seeing clients and charting and doing QuickBooks and all that kind of stuff. I'm ready to carve out X amount of time during the week to do the work. And then the first 3 months of your curriculum is like, actually, we want you to feel. We want you to slow down and feel how you feel. And that like kind of short-circuited me for a little bit, because I'm in this like hustle, like, okay, Kat, I want to know the Instagram algorithm, because who the heck knows about that? And like, I want to like understand marketing, and I want to make the $10,000 a month or whatever the thing is that the last marketing class that I took offered. And And you're like, we'll get to that, but like, how do you feel?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And like the thing that's crazy to me is that like the how-to tools are so easy. Like we spend 4.5 months like thinking about how you feel and then thinking about how your dream client feels, and then the next like that's 50% of the curriculum, and then the last 50% are all the how-to tools, and like that stuff is so easy. And the reason why it is so hard for people to implement and understand and digest the how-to tools is because they're overwhelmed, because nobody stopped and asked them, how do you feel? And how does your ideal client feel? You know? And so from that place of how you feel and how your ideal client feels, that's where we get that connection. And then marketing gets really easy, because it's just like you're speaking to somebody that you know in and out. And then when you get on a sales call, because you're in a regulated place and you're not thinking like, oh, I need to get this sale because, you know, if I don't make this sale, then I'm not going to be able to make my mortgage or my rent, and, all these like threats that are running in the background. Then you come into a sales call with really clear energy, and then your ideal client gets to make a sovereign choice rather than feeding off of this frenetic energy that you're bringing into a call. And so it's so important to slow things down and like actually unpack all this in like a real level. And like, because this work is the way it is, it's circular. Like the same shit that you have around perfectionism is going to come back around a little bit later in a different lesson, because that's how this work works.
Yeah, well, and I'm looping back to something you were saying a minute ago, Kat, but I think especially in service work, I'm realizing like, oh, we have to be willing to not cling to that like story of our authority, or like for me, the word is like mastery, which feels very born of like my complicated academic history and trajectory, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I'm just thinking about like thinking of this idea of metrics. Like, I have a lot of ideas and insight and goals around what my own best version of my writing looks like and where I want it to be and how I want to grow. And that has shockingly little to do with what's happening when I'm holding space for someone else and their writing and their creativity, right? Like, I have a lot of skills and experiences and like stuff that I bring to that space, but like, I'm not trying to support someone's creativity and looking more like mine. I'm trying to like get in
Yes.
their world of their own creativity
Yes.
and their own writing and their writer's voice, and figure out, okay, with what I know and what I've experienced, how can I make you build the best version of this thing that you're trying to build?
Yes. And I think that that's such an important piece, whether you're talking about creativity or you're talking about, like, I worked in the fertility field for a long time. Like, there's so much control, because if we can't control that client, then it makes me look like less of an authority. And if their result is not what, we define in these narrow measures of success, then it comes back to me as an authority of like not being good enough. And so therefore I need to protect myself more. I need to isolate more. I need to go out and get more credentials in order to feel like more of an authority. And instead, if we can just sink into, hey, I trust my own experience, and I also trust that as I'm seeking more ways to expand my own knowledge and expand my own wisdom, I'm going to choose the right things for me. And in that choosing, I am also holding space for my clients in such a way that they are choosing the best thing that is for them, And I love what you just said about like I'm helping them, really tap into their own writer's voice. I'm not trying to make them like write in the way that I write. And I think that that's the true level of coaching or mentorship, or whatever that word is, that we're all trying to do here, is it's ultimately like, how can you best express yourself? I feel like you could also put parent in that too.
Yeah. Well, and what you just said links back to like the seed for this podcast episode, right? Because I think sometimes when we're talking about safety, we are accidentally talking about control. And I don't think that's the same thing, like at all. And I think that is only going to amplify us having this sense of safety as something that like is less possible when we're around more people or something, right? This idea of like, I mean, if my sense of safety is I need to be able to control everything, I'm probably going to feel safer when I'm alone, when I'm guarded, when my walls are up, when I'm not like in a room with other people who I like fundamentally can't control, right?
Yeah. Oh, as soon as you said that first part, I was like, say more, say more, say more, like on the inside. So I'm so glad that you expanded.
He's like, Sarah, that should be a t-shirt or something.
Yeah.
Everything I just said?
Yeah. Yeah. That's going to be the BAM t-shirt.
What did I say?
Like a whole long...
I'm so glad this is being recorded.
It's a whole long paragraph. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
But it also points to, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No.
It points to like asking for help, right? So like if I'm an authority, and I have a patient who comes in and needs help with something I've never experienced before, and I lead the experience by being present to my body and my fear and my not knowing and what have you, and I listen to the person, and we can meet on that level. I'm going to have this whole like both and quality in my mind where I can say, wait, I was just networking with a doctor who actually does that. I'm not the right person for you. You should go see that person, right? Or like, that's really interesting. I want to learn more about that. Instead of, I'm going to make it up right now.
Yeah.
Or, I'm able to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or what have you.
Yeah. That's actually like one of the biggest life lessons that I've learned is right out of grad school, I went back and taught at the acupuncture college that I went to, that Chris and I both went to actually. And the class I was teaching is cumulative review. So it's like at the end of each year, essentially, like you have to like be able to pass and like take a test and pass like based on all the things you should have learned that year. And so I'm teaching this class that tests those students and also like helps them remember all that stuff. And
I bet your handouts were incredible looking.
I had really good handouts, and I also played games. But I remember before I went in to teach my first class, I was like, oh my God, this is so much information. Like, what if I don't know? Like, what if somebody asks me a question and I have no idea? And Natasha, who was the director of that department at the time, was like, just say that. Just say, I don't know. Like, there's no possible way that you're going to be able to, like, just memorize 600-page texts. So, like, just say, I don't know.
If you would have read in the red book on page 372,
exactly.
Second paragraph.
Yeah. Like, if you look at the Materia Medica, it's like, I can't even tell you how many pages it is. It is literally like 3 inches thick. And it's like, of course you don't know everything in the Materia Medica, you know? And that was just one herb book. And so just having the like permission slip from somebody who I looked up to as an authority to say, I don't know in a moment where I truly don't know, like felt like such a breath of fresh air. And I say I don't know all the time. Like
yeah, that permission slip thing that we do in the curriculum is so helpful. Is the ability to like give myself permission to not know, or my ability to give myself permission to take deep breaths before I do something or what have you. It's really incredible.
Yeah. It's a moment of grounding, I think.
Dr. Becky talks about that in Good Inside.
Oh, I'm not at that part. I'm not at that part of the book yet. I haven't reached it yet.
Yeah, this whole idea of parenting being like um, telling your child that you believe them and that you validate their experience and that they have permission to feel that way.
Mm.
What a life-changing, world-changing concept.
Yeah. By the way, like, I'm reading this book and I don't have children, and I think it is like the best book on reparenting.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody's out there and being like, hey, like, I don't have children, or I've chosen not to have children.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that too.
It's a great
Yeah,
We're not getting paid by Dr. Becky.
yeah, I'm also childless by choice, and it's on my to-read list because anytime I've heard her on a podcast, it's like I have to listen to it more than once. It's she's
Yeah.
so insightful.
Yeah. And, like, sort of using Dr. Becky as an archetype, something that I really appreciate about her and love about her.
Dr. Becky as an archetype.
Yep.
That's fantastic. You've got the warrior, the magician. You've got Dr. Becky.
And then we've got Dr. Becky. But what I love is that she doesn't place herself on a hierarchy of, like, I am a parenting expert, because she says, hey, just so you know, this is like an ideal situation, and I fuck it up all the time too. Like, I am not always the most patient person. I'm not always able to regulate myself before I have a hard conversation with my kids. I am not always like this perfect idea of what a parenting expert should be because I mess up with my own kids. And so I think that we need more people like that. And Gabor Mate also does this too, where he talks about his relationship with his kids who are now grown, but, you know, he was, I can't remember which podcast he was on, but he was talking about how he grew up in a family where he felt abandoned and alone. And as he was raising his own kids, he wasn't abandoning them in the ways that his mother abandoned him, but he was overworking and not really at home all the time. And so he placed those wounds on the next generation as well. And so I think it's so important to have these conversations around, like, hey, we are all humans and we all make mistakes and we are all not perfect, and, like, permission to not know and permission to say, like, you are doing your absolute best and that is good enough, and where can you take responsibility?
Yeah, I love that last piece, where can you take responsibility, because there's, in business at least, there's like this, I don't want to do QuickBooks. Like, I feel it in my body. It gives me an unregulated nervous system, which then is like, oh, if I have an unregulated nervous system around QuickBooks, I just shouldn't do it. but then, like, the taking responsibility is leaning into that, asking into that a little bit, and being like, well, why might I have a dysregulated nervous system around QuickBooks, and what can I do to regulate myself around this thing that's uncomfortable?
Yeah.
And yeah. Trying to bring it back to business there.
No, absolutely. And, like,
instead of parenting. No,
it's important, because, you know, like, a real tangible thing that happened for me this year was, like, I've been putting off, like money still dysregulates me a bit. I teach about it, I understand it, and when it comes to my own money, I still have sticky spots. And I've been putting off filing as an LLC S Corp for years now. Like, it's always just been this, like, oh, I'll do that some other day, or I'll do it next year. And I did it this year, and it was like no drama. Like, sometimes we make up these things in our head about how difficult that thing is going to be because we have a dysregulated nervous system about it. And then you do that thing. I mean, obviously I can't do that on my own. I hired somebody to do that. And it was not a difficult thing at all. And so I think checking that story within yourself of, like, why do I have this dysregulation, and understanding it and unpacking it, and then actually just doing the thing, at the end of the day, you still have to look at your QuickBooks.
Yeah, giving yourself permission to recognize that you feel dysregulated around QuickBooks. instead of being like, oh, I don't feel dysregulated around. I'm fine. Everything's fine. It creates drama for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the other thing that's just feeling really clear in me with all of this is just like, and this probably links to my own inner child needs, but I feel like all of this asks us to reframe our concept of trust, because I'm also just thinking about how I feel like for me, I learned or was trained to associate trust with expertise and trust with this sort of like all-knowingness. And I actually feel like some of the things we're describing is like this like different kind of like more rooted kind of trust that can be found in the mistakes, in the like humanity of the other person, in the I don't know. Like, do I trust someone when they always know, or do I trust someone when they can say I don't know? Like, there's something there.
Yeah, and Sarah, also like the do I trust myself?
Well, shit, yeah, that too.
Yeah, I mean, like
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's amazing when, so I took my son to his first year checkup, and we were prescribed this thing, and it took me like 3 or 4 days to recognize, like, well, wait a minute, do I do I want that for my son, or do I not want that for my son? I completely didn't even ask myself that, because I went to a pediatrician, an MD who has this authority, and I trust them. I really do trust them. But like, I wasn't even asking myself. And then also, like, to even further, like, I wasn't even asking my son. I mean, he's pre-verbal. He's not able to say yes or no. But like, he also has consent, and his trust is something that I need to pay attention to as well. I
Chris,
love what you brought there, Sarah.
yeah,
Awesome.
but also, Chris, this is definitely not the first time where I've said something and you've been like, yeah, and also this. And then I feel like, oh, you just like gave me an hour of coaching in like a phrase. Like I feel I feel like what you just said was not at all what I meant, and I really needed to like hear that point, like how this points back at the level of self-trust or the lack thereof.
Yeah.
Just take the compliment. It's fine.
You saw my face.
I did.
That's funny.
He blinked
Well, I
for a
mean, I
second.
don't want to diminish what you said, though, Sarah, because what you said was really, really important. I accept the compliment, and also what you said was really
Okay,
helpful
that's
to me.
fair. That's fair.
Yeah. I mean, that's so beautiful too, because it's like, how can we, like, in that situation that you just gave, Chris, and like that exact scenario happened with me and my dog. Like, the vet prescribed antibiotics where I was like, just blinked out while I was at the vet clinic, paid the $60 for the antibiotics, and then I got home and I was like, wait, but this isn't even, like, she doesn't even have a bacterial infection. Like, why are we giving her antibiotics? And like, it encourages us both to look at trust on both sides of the commerce equation, both as an quote unquote authority, and, pulling apart what authority really means and applying these new concepts that, like, Sarah, you just beautifully articulated, of like, do I trust the person who says, I don't know, and let's look it up together, or I haven't had experience with that, and here's a different, referral for somebody who does have experience with that, or do I trust the person who's just like, I know everything, I am the all-knowing, authority on everything about this, and so, like, applying that concept of trust to that part of the equation, that you all are going to be asked to sit into as a service-based entrepreneur. And then also applying that concept of trust as a consumer. In the example I gave of like, I know that antibiotics work for bacteria and my dog has a fungal infection, therefore why do I need to give my dog antibiotics for a fungal infection? But like that part of me just like checked out in the presence of a white coat. And so like, can we as consumers also be discerning and create this culture of trust within ourselves so that we can then make different decisions for how we do commerce?
And coach our clients to check in with themselves before they make decisions.
Absolutely.
One of the things I loved about how I started BAM, how I started that was we had I don't know how many conversations we had, Kat, but we had at least 2 or 3, and the ending of the conversation was always you like, I trust that you'll get something out of this, and also, check in with yourself. Let me know, which is such a permission slip, right? Like I'm thinking of a client I saw last week where they're like, how many times should I come to see you for this problem? And I said, well, based on my experience, I think 4-ish appointments would be good because that's, whatever. How does that feel for you? And they responded, well, you're the boss. To which I nipped that in the butt. And we took a moment and took deep breaths around it. And they said to me like, well, actually my budget and my time, I'm not sure if I can come every week for 4 weeks. And that conversation developed into a really beautiful therapeutic experience.
Yeah.
And so like that permission that you provided for me before I started BAM, and that I hope that I can present to other people with just pausing and saying, how does that make you feel? Check in with your self-trust, check in with your body, your nervous system. It's such a superpower business skill, I think.
Yeah. Thanks for that. It's also making me reflect on one of the pieces that I think that we can do is invest in long-term relationships. And what I mean by that is, in this business world where we talk about making that 10K a month and filling up your containers and, all the things that, we work on through all sorts of different business programs, I would like to shift the conversation to how can you create connection in a long-term relationship with your community and your audience so that when the right time comes, they want to say yes to you. Or when the right time comes and it's still a no, that's fully out of their own sovereignty. And so when I ask people, where did you find out about my work and how long have you been following my work? Some people have been following my stuff for years before they sign up for anything. And to that, I'm so, so grateful that they found so much value in just the free stuff that they continued to stick around until it was the right time for them. And I have one client that I'm thinking of in particular, and she's been with me since I was at grad school, since I was a grad student at 5 Branches. Like, she came and saw me as a patient when I was still in grad school. She's about to join the next round of BAM. And, like, that is when did we start grad school, Chris? 2008? Yeah. So that is so. Like
2007, 2008.
Yeah, somewhere in that range, right? And so that is at this point, a decade and a half relationship that I have with this person. And I think that if we can start thinking about commerce as being more long-term relationships and, really that requires us to stop doing this hierarchy authority thing. Like, it really means that we get down onto and really just, it's not even get down onto, it's just acknowledging that we're all on the same human level and start connecting from that place. I think that is one of the ways that we can start untangling this like toxic capitalistic trait of quick, fast results and quick, fast, like, relationships. Like, I'm not interested in the turnover. You know, that's something that I think a lot of people are like, oh, you just need to go out and find more people and, like, get more people. And to me, it's like even when I'm thinking about my next home / land purchase, like, it's going to be my forever home. Like, I don't want to do a short-term relationship with things that mean a lot to me, including the place that I live, including my clients, including my friends, you know, my partnerships, my collaborators. Like, I don't want superficial and shallow. Like, I want the deep, long connections.
Yeah, that asks you to see your potential clients as humans, as like meaningful people who have breath and heartbeats and what have you, instead of just people who have wallets.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, we're looking at business differently. It's weird, but it's like, I don't know. I think it's way more fulfilling and much safer and much more connecting.
Weird is good.
Yeah, at least I'm feeling, right?
What's that?
At least I'm feeling.
Yeah.
I'm taking the time to feel instead of like rush through things.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that feeling, it asks your clients to feel too, you know? Like, I remember the last business program I took when they were talking about sales calls, the advice they gave was figure out in any way possible how to get the yes by the end of the call, because if you get a maybe at the end of the call, you know, she gave a statistic, I can't remember what the statistic was, but like it's like a 70% chance that they're gonna be a no. So you need to get that yes by the end of the call. And that felt so gross in my body, because I don't know about you, but like if I'm gonna make a investment of over $1,000, I need to sit with that in my body, and I need time away from the person who's asking me to make that investment. Like, for some people it's an immediate yes, like, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for the majority of people, it's I need to sit with that. And if we can't honor that space within ourselves, we can't create that space for other people to then be able to do that for themselves.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of this other kind of messaging that I've encountered, or this like language that I hear a lot, which is like this idea of creating clients wherever you go. And I think there's something meaningful in that, in this thing of like not limiting myself or not pretending that I know where all my clients are going to come from. But at the same time, the way that message gets talked about, I've often really struggled with, and maybe because there's this tone of like seeing everybody as a potential dollar sign, or this pressure to, it almost, I mean, even in the language, right? Like, I'm creating the client, like that language itself sounds like I'm taking their sovereignty, like I'm creating them. Like, there's just something about it that has like never sat well with me, and I hear it a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just, like, as soon as you said that, it, like, I don't know about you, but I felt that straight in my body of, like, a, huh, nope.
Yeah.
Like,
See, and this is the safety as connection, right? Because I feel like the first 2 and 3 and 10 and 20 times I heard that message, I kind of felt like I was the only one who it was not sitting well with. And it was, you know, it made me feel kind of like, I guess maybe I'm not cut out for this, or maybe, you know, all the like self-doubt that can come in. And it's like really wonderful to be sitting here with you two and be like, yeah, no, this doesn't land with all of us. And that, I don't know, it
Yeah.
helps not to like avoid my own self-trust. But again, I think there's this part of like, well, connection does, it is needed for self-trust too, because it's sort of like, it's collaboration and it's being witnessed and it's, I don't know, there's
Yeah.
something there that's so important.
Yeah. And I think the like alternative way to look at that is like, yes, I think that, you brought up that point of, don't limit yourself. Like we want to take the wisdom from that statement and like don't limit yourself. But I don't know, like I've been in those situations where people have done the like elevator speech when I didn't ask for the elevator speech. And
Yeah.
it's just so uncomfortable and awkward, and I'm like, okay, I guess I'm gonna just sit through these 2 minutes of my life now because like this kind of sucks, but I don't want to be rude. But like the alternative to that is like I freaking love my job so much. Like I will talk about it with anybody who will listen. And by my job, I mean nervous system regulation, trauma work, business as an ethical way. And so if I am just being myself and being my passionate self who loves my job, like it's gonna come up in conversation,
Right.
right? Like I imagine that you talk about creativity all the freaking time, Sarah.
Yeah, I do.
Like like you can't not.
Yeah.
And so if in that process your work comes up and they happen to be somebody who needs that service, like, hey, that's a much more organic way to create that connection and invite them into your space rather than, hey, random person, let me just corner you and tell you my elevator speech because my business coach tells me that I need to create clients everywhere I go. Like, ew. Just ew.
Yeah. You know what I do want to say, and I don't know if this should be cut or not, but you you mentioned early on that we're a third of the way through the program already. And then Chris, you at one point were talking about how the slowness of us getting into certain things has been challenging for you. But Kat, when you said we're already a third of the way through, I thought, oh no, it's going too quickly. Like I really had this feeling of like I couldn't believe that we're already a third of the way through.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of nutty. It moves. I mean, like if you think about 9 months, it feels like a really long
Hmm.
gestation period. But then, like when you're in it and you sort of look back,
Yeah.
it moves pretty quickly. And
Hmm.
that pace is on purpose.
Hmm.
Like I know it was annoying and it was hard for you, Chris, and I'm kind of like jabbing at you a little bit, but like I've been in those like programs that are like, let's make 10K in 12 weeks sort of a situation, and it's like, oh my God, I was in complete dysregulation for 3 months. And
Yeah.
so
Right.
I want to create a space where we can be in regulation with our businesses, and that
Hmm.
takes time. That requires us to sit with the hard part of slowing down, and the pace does quicken up as we get into like, well, right now it's slow because we're in the yin modules, we're in metal and water, and as we get into wood, fire, earth, like the pace does quicken up.
Oh, thank God.
Chris is still plugged into
I'm,
the capitalism matrix of like,
yeah.
I need things done faster. Yeah.
I mean, part of me is grateful for the next modules being faster, but like also in full disclosure, so one of the things we're currently working on in BAM is a worksheet that kind of helps delineate, your purpose, your whys, and all that kind of stuff. And that worksheet is MF. I mean, at first blush, I did it, and I'm like, great, awesome, that's clear. And then, because we're taking our time, I had the instinct to read it over again, and then I'm like, I hate this, and crumple it up and throw it.
You printed
And
it
then
out?
like, so I've done that worksheet. Yeah, Sarah, you might not know me, but yeah, I definitely printed it out. And I, I have done that. I don't know. I mean, I've done it a lot of times, and each time is different, and each time is much more
Mm.
um, in alignment, I think.
Yeah.
And it's because it's slow,
Yeah.
and it's not slow like dragging it out. It's slow enough for me to, regulate myself after finishing one round, one draft of it, and it's like shaking my snow globe,
Yeah.
and then allowing the like dust to settle and be like, I want to take one more pass at that.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I have no idea if we have intentions of taking, like, coming back to that every single module. I'm not sure, but it feels like it's an important document.
Yeah.
Mm.
We definitely
And it's
refer
our
to it.
document that you,
Yeah.
okay, we need, like, I'm recognizing that it's a document that I'm going to be spending time with.
Yeah.
And if you would have given this as an assignment for 1 week to do, and then we like blow past it,
Mm.
yeah, I don't think I would have gotten as much out of it as I have.
Yeah. And it's a document that I continue to look at too. Like, I've done this for my own business, and because, businesses come in cycles, and I'm also an evolving business, I look at that document all the time and I'm like, oh, does that still align? And and I had an opportunity to like revisit it before I presented it to you guys in this last round, and I think it had been maybe 6 or 7 months since the last time I looked at it, and I was like, oh shit, I have to like do a bunch of this over again, because even in the 6 and 7 months, my business has shifted and my messaging has changed. And what I want to talk about is slightly different. Like, there's just a slightly different texture to it, and I want to be more and more clear and always be referring back to that document as sort of my touchstone of what I want to talk about. So, yeah.
That description, like, that feels really integral to engaging with entrepreneurship from a spiritual perspective, like seeing our businesses as living things that we're tending versus like, wait a minute, I've already figured this out. Why is there like more to do or like more to pay attention to? Like, it's sort of getting outside of this expectation of like figuring something out and then it's like done.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Or
it is.
is my checking account.
It is this like evolving thing, and later on we're going to talk about our business as being like a living organism and an entity. And, I think that when we recognize it as such, then we really think of it as like a business partner that also has its own Tao, that also has its own shape that it wants to take. Instead of us being the authority, quote unquote, and trying to force this into a picture that we want it to look like, we have to recognize that the business also has its own life that it wants to like live.
That's so good, Kat.
Yeah. Well, my dears, just as a wrap up, thank you so very much for A, being here, B, being a part of the BAM community, C, being willing to have these in-depth, rich, juicy conversations about things that people are afraid to talk about. And I want to make sure that people know how to find you. So Sarah, can you please share what your internet places are so people can look you up?
Yeah, my internet places. So pretty much everything can be found on my website, which is sarahteresacook.com. Sarah with an H, Teresa without an H. But you can also find me on Instagram. My handle is freelance.feminist. And I also write a newsletter called For the Birds, and that's hosted on Substack, and that's free. There's no paywall. It's a really great way if you're like curious about creative coaching, but you're not sure and you really want to gauge like if you and I might be a good fit. It's a great way to get prompting and self-coaching tools and just creative resources for free from me twice a month. So that's sarahcook.substack.com. And I think that's
By
it.
the way, I love that Substack. It's a great one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Excellent. And Chris, where are the internet
My
places?
internet places are probably my website as well,
Yep.
which is csmiller.co. And there you can find any workshops that I might be facilitating. I have last time I was with Kat, she told me that I need to say this more. I have a collection of haikus that I have on there. I also have my Instagram, but I am taking a break. I am taking a social media break.
Sarah's holding up Chris's book. I love it. I love it.
Oh, Lord. So yes, my website. My website is how you find me.
Perfect. And
if you're in Portland, come to the Portland Wellness Collective. You can have tea or something like that.
Yeah. So Chris and I are going to be collaborating on a whole series of talks about Taoist wisdom, and they are going to align with the full moon of 2023. So each full moon will be hanging out on Instagram Live on my page, Empowered Curiosity, and we will share a particular hexagram that is associated with that moon and that moment in nature, or that time in the seasons rather, and we'll talk about some spiritual and also practical ways to ground into that space. So, anything you want to add to that?
Kat will wear a specific costume for each lunar.
Why is he promising this? Why? I have a very, very small capsule wardrobe, Chris. I have, like, every item of clothing fits into one giant Tupperware box, and so I do not have space for costumes. I will not be buying costumes.
Kat will wear one of her things from her capsule wardrobe each lunar new year. Each lunar month.
Maybe don't lead with that.
Yeah.
Says the creative coach. I love it. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that can't be the, like, hook for people is Kat's gonna wear a costume. Kat and Chris will talk about Taoism. That's the hook. But you can find that on my Instagram page on each evening of the full moon, or if you would like to access the recorded archives, just go to eccourses.com and you can sign up for all that there. It's free. So come hang out with us.
I'll bring my awkward self.
And you get this. You get this all year, you guys. Wonderful.